Today I want to talk to you about the philosophy behind the lore design for EverQuest Next. As Dave said in his presentation, the lore for EverQuest Next is a total reboot of the franchise and the flagship IP for Sony Online Entertainment. The recent Star Trek movie is an excellent example of the approach that we're taking. Hold on 1 second.
Keep going. There you go.
Here we go.
Who? That's me, I guess. That's not very nice.
Yep, that looks like Darren McPherson to me.
That's the thinker?
Although,
He sits like that at work.
seriously, not to deflect this, but does this thinker have clothes on in the famous statue? I think he does.
So the original of this didn't. Thank goodness Rosie, our art director, commanded them to put clothes on it.
Those who saw the original cannot unsee it.
Right, it wasn't pretty.
I think the players would have appreciated the original, truthfully. So, expect a retelling and reimagining of the EverQuest story, drawing on nostalgia for the franchise and in homage to all the EverQuests who precede us to this point. Many of the original creators of EverQuest are on the EverQuest Next team. Those of you who are familiar with the old lore and the original game should remember the name of Bill Trost, who was the EverQuest lead designer. He recently rejoined us from Tryon, and he is now on the EverQuest Next team. So we have access to his understanding of the foundational lore of this game, the reasons why he wrote every single character that existed in the original game at its launch, every individual piece of lore, the underlying story of Kinos, the Combine, everything about the world was his responsibility, his purview, and we have that to draw on now. We also have, and on this panel, Ryan Barker, who's a veteran of 13 EverQuest expansions. Together, the body of knowledge that we have related to EverQuest and EverQuest lore couldn't be duplicated, not even within our own company. You'll see the quality and the attention to detail and the understanding of the lore that comes from the participation of all those people. As we mentioned in the world panel, you'll see familiar faces and names. You'll visit places that are familiar to you from previous games in EverQuest Next, and you'll see a lot of new stuff besides. And we wanted to talk a little bit about Karamorth X.
So yeah, Karamorth X is, those of you who are familiar with the EQ1 and EQ2 lore will recognize the Vex name for sure as one of Elven royalty, and we're bringing that family back. There'll be a lot different this time though, and Karamorth is an example of a new character set and really grounded in the old lore.
So, before you go on, I wanted to explain one of the reasons why we chose to do the reset. It's not just to support transmedia, which you'll see more of from us in upcoming weeks, with things like the short stories from Maxwell Alexander Drake and Robert Lassen, one of which is already posted up on our website. That's the story about the Tear Doll. It's our intent to open doors and effectively build upon the concepts that we talked about in showing off your creativity this morning, where we were working on critical mass. We want our players to have multiple points of entry to our intellectual property. We want them to have multiple points of entry to our game. I'll be very happy if in the future I encounter somebody on a plane or at GDC or any place out in the world that is familiar with EverQuest lore because they've been reading books. They may not even own a PC. They may never played a massively multiplayer game. It's my desire for people to participate in our world through as many opportunities and from as many avenues as humanly possible. So it's our responsibility to set a bar for the quality of the lore and the story that permits us to do that. Whether or not, as every people in this room, you care about the game that we're all playing together, we still want to be all-inclusive. So that's what you should expect from us as relates to the philosophy and the quality of the lore that we're trying to deliver to you.
And just to touch on that a little bit more, we really want the lore to stand up on its own independent of the game so that we can really branch out beyond the game once we have the world, we might make several games in this world at some point, have lots of stories that are coming from that, novels, things like that.
Yeah, we built this really deep timeline with a lot of hooks in it. So EverQuest Next is set at a very particular point in that timeline, but there's a wealth of stories, a wealth of characters, a wealth of depth to the world that could serve as the settings for other stories, other books, other games, and part of this rebuilding of the franchise process is to give us those opportunities for the future.
So, as Steve mentioned yesterday in the World panel, deep is both a figurative and a literal term. We have to have all of these stories. We have to have all this history so that we can give you an authentic and genuine bit of archaeology when you dig under keynotes. You need to know what all of those things were. We have some really good methods of storytelling we want to share with you now. We really have this motto of show and don't tell. Does anyone read quest text, or you just skip through that stuff? I know there's a few quest text readers out there, but I feel like
this panel's a little slanted.
Yeah. So actually, okay. So this is not the right crowd to ask this question, because this is the lore crowd. But there are a large amount of people who just click through the game, and we really want the story, them to be delivered the same story that you lore readers are getting. So one of our things is that we really want to show through what's happening in the environment, what's going on, visual storytelling. We have some amazing AI. We keep mentioning this, mention it in every panel. When you walk into a city, and I'm going to steal Steve's example here. Is that a jerk? Like that. You walk into a city, and this city's being harassed by invading orcs. The people are in their homes. They look terrified. There's not children playing in the streets. No one is tending to the fields, and the city will decay, and eventually people will move out. And we can imagine that if nobody does anything about this, that eventually there will just be a ruin there. The world evolves this way over time. When you walk in, do you need to know that there's been orcs marauding? No, because you see orcs all over the place. You see that this area has had lots of attacks on it. You see orc emblems or graffiti on the walls. You can walk in and know what's happening without us, giving you a bunch of quest text.
And then one of the powerful things that this allows us to do, if you can go into an area and you can get the big picture story just by looking at stuff and seeing what's happening there, then we can concentrate our efforts on telling the next level of storytelling, the more personal stories. We can tell adventures about the mother who lost a son fighting against the orcs, or we can give you a story about a shopkeeper who his whole livelihood is riding on this, and his family's future is riding on getting this next caravan into town on time. And it makes the story much more personal because you've already got that big overarching picture through the visual storytelling.
Right. So with limited voiceovers and the visual storytelling that we want to use, we really want the world to become alive, a place that you can interact without having to read a bunch of text. Move your mic closer to your face, Steve.
Closer.
Excuse me. So we covered our MSI. So as everybody on the panel but myself has mentioned, we have all these stories being created. Will you be able to get tons and tons of lore through text? Absolutely. We're not taking that out. It's just not the only way. It's not our crutch for conveying information. So will there be libraries of things that you can read? Absolutely, because we're generating them. We have to generate them so that we can have all these amazing things. We had to generate the history, for instance, for the short stories to be created. Back. So, hold on. So, can I get Maxwell and Robert to stand up? These two gentlemen here, and you can see their booth out there, have created some amazing stories from EverQuest's past, and they are fantastic. Yes, they are. Now, I know that only only one of them is available right now through the app.
The Last Stand of the Tear
The
Doll.
Last Stand of the Tear Doll is available. And
on the list.
Roberts, I just finished reading Roberts last night as I was going to bed, and it's
The Fall of Bastion.
The Fall of Bastion is amazing. And you know, we're avid readers. We read a lot, and this is every bit as good as anything I've read in recent past. You guys really need to get in there, and it really brings the world alive. I can't wait to meet. I don't know spoilers, but I can't wait to meet some of these characters in game because, you know, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, all of these characters need to be rich and vibrant so that you can care. Thanks, guys.
And it's a very powerful form of collaboration with them too, because like Darren said, we gave them some history, we gave them places, things, people, you know, what's going on in the world, and we drew upon the richness of the stuff that they wrote and pulled that back into the game. So that kind of collaboration with authors only enrich the world and just make the stories that much deeper and better.
And this is really just the tip of the iceberg, because I've got a stack of about 11 stories on my desk that I need to edit when I get back.
We're very serious about
Very
this
serious about
extended universe sort of talking things that you're not going to even encounter in the game. You encounter in history books, but you don't need to read a history book in a library. You can read these stories and find out exactly what happened, and it's very cool.
And we've talked a lot in each one of these panels, and even in the debut, about collaboration. Until it happens, it's all talk, right? Anyone can stand up and say, well, here's what I'd like to do. This is an example of what we are doing. And when we talk about collaboration, we talk about changing how we are developing games. We talk about changing games, how games are played. Collaboration is one of the key themes that we're building upon, and this is just one example of how we are following through with what it is we're talking about. 2 years ago, it was ideas. Darren and I and Ryan sitting in a room designing. Now it is execution.
That's great. So let's talk about some of the characters that you'll meet. We wanted these characters to be memorable, but not just because we told you that they should be memorable. We wanted you to have relationships with these people. You know, one of the reasons that we're doing so much, getting so many stories written is so that you can be introduced to these characters. We want them to be active participants in the world. Alongside of you, you get to involve. Think of Gandalf. Gandalf was a really cool character. He was very iconic and very heroic. One of the things that really made you love him is because he participated in these events. He wasn't, you know, this mythical figure that you never saw. He wasn't, you know, Sauron. I would say was a bad enemy.
He wasn't a quest giver.
You never saw him. Where's that feeling of, oh man, I really don't like that guy? Because you never saw him, you never had to deal with him. He was intangible. And Gandalf was very tangible and very much part of the story. And we want to have those memorable characters. We want to create. I mean, how many of you, as we saw in the thing, how many of you liked Drista Wurdenberg? Right? He was a really cool character, and you really loved him, and he had all these issues. We all have favorite characters from our lore and from other things that we've read, and we want to have these types of characters so that you can have these emotional bonds with them as well. Why do you go and you help this village? Because people you care about live there. Does anyone get emotionally bonded to the characters they read about in books? You absolutely do. And we want those same sorts of things here. And all it requires from us is to have a lot of background and a lot of time for you to be with them and to get to know them. So these are very, very personal connections to the people. We also really want our villains, before I get into this slide, we want our villains to be also personal. Villains are people too, right? They have rights. They want to be hated. There are some really good examples of villains who you just despise. But then there's also examples, as I mentioned, Sora, where you're like, okay, I understand he's the bad guy, but he's never done anything to me. I mean, he doesn't strike me as on a personal level. You just know he's the bad guy.
In the book, you never even see him.
Right, you don't see him. So I'm going to draw on an example of a game that a lot of us have played recently. Borderlands 2. If you played Borderlands 2, raise your hand. Maybe a few of you had some cool, fun stuff in it. It was a good game, obviously not the game we're making. But Handsome Jack was a good villain. The first 10 minutes, you just hate this guy. He's trying to kill you. He's killed friends of yours. They really build it to a point where you just don't like the guy. Our villains are our NPCs, they're characters in the story. They're not just a facade, a cardboard cutout. We want them to be doing things. They are actively moving against you. You'll see them in the story. You'll want to kill them the whole time and be unable to. And then be frustrated by that. And eventually get your moment of glory where there's a resolution. And there's these feelings that can be evoked by this sort of thing in combination with AI and visual storytelling. It's very powerful for us.
Yeah. Our villains are so much more than bags floating at the bottom of a dungeon. Like, they're not that at all. They're that too, but in addition to that, they're also
They'll drop
characters.
loose. It'll be monk loot, but they'll drop.
If you had the choice between a person standing in the corner for the next 10 years with a question mark above their head or an exclamation point, or a character, be they a villain or a good guy, who actually participated in the game with you, who was driven by AI, who showed up when you were doing adventures, who you either had to kill or got killed by, and basically experienced the ongoing play of the game with, I know which one I would choose.
The choice is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Another reason that we keep mentioning is that we really want the story to be a part of this game. The world to be a part of this game. The world is
a character.
It has depth. It feels. I'm not talking just about the terrain. I'm talking about the environments. I'm talking about the towns and the villages and all the places that you go, and we back all this up with lore. So you'll be able to go out and actually perform archaeology. Hey, what was here before? Those people, whether or not this is supported officially as a progression or not, you can go out there and go, I know, hey, who's the expert here on what's outside the city of Kinos? Well, I know every stitch of it because I've explored it all. And I found out that there's these ruins here, and the reason these ruins were here, well, I found that out in a story that Maxwell Alexander Drake wrote, or that Robert Lassendrope or one of our other authors wrote. And it's all there. We want to tie it all together.
And as Dave mentioned in the reveal, and I talked about yesterday on the world panel, we can literally paint the world using our collaboration with Storybricks, that technology, to implant these drives and desires into locations in the world so that the population reacts to those things. So again, whether it's some story tied to the history or something that's going on now at the present time, it's helping that story come alive in very active, interactive ways.
Thank you. All right, I'll pass it over to Steve or Brian. It's me.
All right, so now you know a little bit about how our approach to world building went, what our goals were when we first started doing this. And I'm going to get into a little bit into the actual history of the game. So what you're looking at right now is a timeline of 20,000 years of recorded history on Norath. It's broken up into 4 eras, a bunch of different ages inside those eras. The eras are named for sort of the overriding society that had the most influence on Norath during that time. So you start with the Kel'Derain, and there's a Lost era, and the Dahl era, and the Combine era. What we're going to specifically talk about today is the Dahl era, which we'll get into in a second. And then the ages are divided up by a very specific event that happened that really changed the culture in some way, but didn't necessarily destroy the whole society or anything like that. They're still in charge, but something happened that changed it in a fundamental way. So we'll get into the Dahl era. So those of you that played EQ1 and EQ2 will recognize the word Dahl, or at least the syllable, I suppose. There's several different types of Dahl in the previous games: Quetta-Dahl, Fair-Dahl, Tyr-Dahl. And once again, we're using it the same way. It's basically another word for elf. And there's different types of elves. So the Dahl era covered 2,000 years of elven dominance across Norath. They were clearly far and away the most powerful force in society on the world. And it began with the Age of Ascension. Before the Age of Ascension, the Lost Era is a really dark time. There's a lot of evil creatures about. There wasn't much society to speak of. The elves mostly lived in small villages and whatnot, and they didn't really have control of their environment. They were really just fighting to survive. The Age of Ascension is where all that changed, and they started founding cities, having technology, and being able to defend their lands and form kingdoms and eventually empires and whatnot. So right after the Age of Ascension covers all that time, right up until the elves figured out how to use the, sorry, I went too far. use the spires you guys are used to seeing in the wizard spires. That's actually the big shift for the elves in that era was when they figured out how to use those things to travel vast distances. So this opened up all kinds of opportunities for exploration, where they started to run into different races and different realms and regions and planes and whatnot. And this is where that's why it's called the Age of Allies, is where they started to form these bonds between the different societies and sort of build up an actual interracial society, I guess would be a good term for it.
And it's worth calling out that, again, because you have to, even though there's a lot of familiar things in here, don't assume that they're handled the same way in our storyline as previous games. So the spires that you're used to seeing may look like the regular wizard teleport spires that you're used to from previous games, but ours can actually not just take you to certain places on Norath, but to realms beyond Norath as well.
Like I mentioned, the alliances started forming between the different races and whatnot. And the elves even befriended the dragons in some form. This is a pretty big event because the dragons really brought a lot of magical knowledge to the elves, and it signaled a big change in the speed at which the society developed. The dragons were able to help them with a lot of magical knowledge and whatnot as they progressed. So this was really a golden age for all involved. Like, this was sort of the golden age of Norath, if you will, where everyone was mostly friendly. There were occasional squabbles or wars with aggressive creatures and whatnot. But for the most part, this was sort of the advancement age, where everyone was fairly happy and moving in the right direction. But as with all good things, it of course had to come to an end, with your old friends, the Shissar, showed up and decided to ruin the party. So they first appeared friendly. The elves had, of course, had alliances and friends with all these other races, and this just seemed like another one that was going to be friendly. And I'm not sure what the elves were doing, trusting a snake, but they ended up betraying the elves. They were basically just biding their time for the perfect moment to betray them. So in the middle of another war that they had helped trigger, they actually betrayed the elves and attacked them and almost conquered Norath. They laid waste to several elven cities. It really looked dire, and the only reason the elves really came out of that was because of all the other previous alliances they had made with the other races. So the combined forces of the elves and the other races, small c, turned the Shissar back and sealed the spires that led to the Shissar worlds.
I think it may have happened, Ryan, because the snakes have very expressive faces. They were probably smiling.
Because they read from a distance and,
Yes.
and see
They were
Snakes
visible
are
from a
not.
distance. They were very, very emotional.
All right. We'll write that in. This was a change in age here too. Right after the Shissar War, this is when the Takish Age happened, and most of you will recognize the name Takishiz from previous games, and that was their capital city. The Takish Age was a big shift because the elves became paranoid that could happen again. Maybe one of the other races was just biding time and waiting for them to be exposed and bring down their society. So they started. A lot of racial tension started to divide the empire. All the alliances they had became very strained. The elves sort of started to feel themselves superior, and that was really embodied in the Quetzal movement. The Quetzal started out as it actually started out as a really positive force of sort of highborn elves, the best of society, if you will. War heroes and whatnot were considered Quetzal, kings and dukes and things like that. But eventually it sort of turned into, a bad thing where they sort of felt themselves superior to everyone else and really started subjugating all the other races. And the only reason,
Well, no, and again, this is one of those things where just because you're familiar with the term doesn't mean we're treating it the same way. So in previous games, Quetzal, Feardal, Tyrdal were different races, different subspecies of elves, and really in our game, the Quetzal is more like a social sect of elves. So there's kind of more like one elven race, and it turns out through the storyline, you'll kind of figure out how those subdivide and what that really means for those other names.
So the only reason this really worked for the elves is they had a unique form of magic that was sort of like a nuclear deterrent. Basically, they held all the magic cards and were able to...
They're really good at playing that.
Really good at mana. But yeah, so they had this higher form of magic that even the dragons were afraid of, and so that really allowed them to sort of have this vast empire and form the Takish Empire that imposed all this oppressive regime over all the other races. And terrible question. And this is a point where the dragons really they didn't like this at all. And even though the elves had high magic, it wouldn't let them have sort of the level of control over actual dragons that they did over other races. But there are lots of other draconic races that were allied with the dragons that they totally could subjugate. So like the kobolds is a really good example, like drakes and wyverns and things like that, all fell into this oppression as well. And this is when the dragons became isolated and went back up to Velius and basically didn't have anything to do with the rest of the Elven Empire, the other races, for a really long time. So the Takish Empire probably would have stood for hundreds and hundreds, well, it did stand for hundreds and hundreds of years, but it would have stood for hundreds more had it not been for the Sundering. And the Sundering was destroyed the capital of Takishi's, and the elves aren't exactly sure what caused it, but one of the teleportation spires exploded and basically covered the entire capital in miles and miles of rock. So there's a giant ruined city under this huge mountain where their capital used to be. High magic stopped working for some reason related to this as well, so the empire really fell into decay, and it triggered a lot of different civil wars where the previous kingdoms started fighting against each other and vying for power and whatnot. Eventually they were all put down and a sort of strained peace set in where a shadow of the old empire existed, and they were able to keep the peace and whatnot, but it definitely wasn't anywhere near the power level that they had before. And that ushers in Steve.
It's worth mentioning too, so the Sundering happens, and as Ryan said, Takish is buried underneath all these miles and miles of rock, and there's devastation and destruction. What's atop that now is the Ashfang, which is that new area that you saw in the presentation. So again, all that story is layered in there. There's reasons for why that's there and why Ashfang looks the way that it does.
And to those of you, before you go on, to those of you who keep track of lore, and I know that there are a lot of you, because we love you, and you've been at it for 14 plus years. One point, the Sundering is probably going to actually change in our storyline. We'll probably call it something else. Just something that I want to let you know. It's probably not
Very large party.
the Sundering or the Cataclysm.
Anyway, so like Ryan mentioned, as part of the evolution of the Takish Empire, they got so full of themselves, so convinced that their way was right, that they even started subjugating some of the draconic races. So when the Sundering happens and high magic gets broken, the dragons don't have to be wary of the elves anymore, and now they kind of got a grudge to settle against the elves. So they really lashed out in a big way, and their army started moving, and they swept into Fade, where the elves had vast settlements and throughout that continent, and the dragons just rolled through and started devastating cities, killing countless people. The last remnants of the Takish Empire, was kind of stragglers left behind. That got wiped away by the dragon's aggression kind of moving through the world. The positive thing that happened out of this was that a new alliance formed. And so, we had the Coatadal, who were the kind of, elven purists. There was another faction of elves within their society that was open and welcoming of other races, and those were the Fyrdahl. And so the Fyrdahl joined together with some of the races that the Takish had formerly oppressed, like the ogres, like the dwarves, Karens, and they came together to form this alliance of equals. And so the Combine kind of had some momentum and started striking back against the dragons. But it ushered in this very long and costly war. And unfortunately, no matter how good their spirit was or how fiercely they were fighting for their homelands, the forces of the dragons were just too powerful. Picture just death and devastation on an incredible scale. And so the Combine forces realized that they couldn't stay in their homelands anymore. They had to flee somewhere else. So to buy time for this, they decided that they had to make this one final stand. And this last stand happens at the fortress called Bastion, which is this great story that you'll be able to read. And it tells the tale of this one last group of elves, this group of their best soldiers led by Karamor Thex, and that is the Teardal. So the Teardal in our game are this elite force of elves. And Karamor and his forces are going to distract the dragons, keep them at bay, while at Bastion, the last stragglers, the last remnants of the Combine of Court can board ships and sail away. And their plan is that they're going to go to Kunark, because Kunark at this time is pretty much a wild frontier. And there's been some settlements there over time, but nothing huge. And at least the Combine know that the dragons aren't there, so they feel like they can get away, hopefully set up shop in Kunark and rebuild and kind of hopefully one day make a stand again. So now we start moving beyond the Dahl era into the next era of history, which is the Combine era, when the Combine are the dominant force on North. The beginning of the Combine era is this Age of Exile. The stand at Bastion is successful. The cost is very high, but the Combine...
Spoilers.
Yeah, sorry. The details really come alive in the story, so you're going to want to read it anyway. But thankfully, some amount of the Combine is able to get away and sail to Kunark. So awesome. The dragons are left behind. This looks like things are going to be okay. And so they're going to be spending some time on Kunark. But what they don't realize is that there's an old enemy waiting for them. The Shissar are on Kunark, and they've been preparing another attack against the Combine forces. And it's like the Combine just sailed right into their waiting arms. And the Shissar are like, oh yeah. And the Shissar have a new alliance now. They have a race of soldiers that they've bred and they're totally mind controlling. And those are the Ixar. So between these, let me go back. You know that's coming. This really leads to like 500 years of captivity, and the Combine are completely subjugated by the Shissar and their Ixar soldiers. And this is a very dark time. Like the Combine are really down. It was their last stragglers. They've got no high magic. It's really desperate. They're completely subjugated. There's no freedom amongst their people.
Nobody.
Yeah. This is where the blues comes from on Nora. It's that kind of time, and but thankfully something happens, which we'll reveal some details of in future stories. But the Ixar start an uprising, and the Combine kind of feed into this because these Ixar want to be free, and the Combine want to be free of the Shissar rule as well. So the Combine join in on this. They're able to overthrow the Shissar and once again drive them back to their own world and seal the portal behind. So things sound like they're, going well again now. The Combine is there. They're able to rebuild a little bit. The Ixar are starting to build their own society, but the Ixar are a little broken. They've been completely subjugated, and so there's a big portion of their society that now that they're free, they can't help kind of adopting some of the old ways of their masters, and they start thinking, these Combine have a lot of old knowledge that we don't have. And it's very useful to keep them around. And so one of the characters that rises to prominence in the Ixar society, a guy named Venerable Sather, decides that he really wants to keep these guys here. And the Combine don't want to be subjugated again. They don't want to be under the thumb of just this other empire. And there's factions within the Ixar that are sympathetic with the Combine. And so once again, it's time to leave, and now they've got to go back and retake their homeland. So this begins the next age, which is the Age of Heroes, which is the time when EverQuest Next begins. So imagine this setting. You've got all these different races. You've got the elves, you've got the dwarves, you've got ogres, their allies there, and they've been subjugated for a long time. Their society's been decimated. They're holding on to fragments of history, because that's all that they have anymore. And they've made the decision to leave the land that they know, that their current generations have grown up in, to go to a place that their forefathers talked about, to return to this land. But they don't know what they're going to face. Like, there was a huge war there, and all their old civilization was wiped out. Are the dragons still there? Are they just going into yet another trap? what's going to happen? So the Combine sails back, and now they have to make a new foothold in what amounts to an unexplored frontier. They don't know what they're going to face anymore. So they found a new city. They found the city of Kinos, and that's going to be their foothold in this land. But things have changed over this 500 years that they've been gone, and there's new political forces that have arisen in the world and new enemies to face in this land. And there's a lot of questions that they have to answer, like what's going to happen to this society? Who are they going to be encountered? Who are they struggling against for resources? Because they've come with nothing. They've got like clothes on their backs and a few ships and some supplies, but they've got to very quickly get resources from this land. And so picture the Kinos that you'll encounter at the start of the game is really this ragged frontier town. It's the Mos Eisley of Norath, because there's a lot of people, that there's people who are doing good and struggling and want to build new lives, and there's some people who are coming in who want to take advantage of that. So how this city evolves and how it grows over time, that's where you guys come in, because you are the ones who get to tell the next chapter of the story. And so when you encounter that Kinos at the beginning, that is this rough and tumble frontier town, you are the ones who are going to have to help that become a great city, to become the jewel in Norath's crown, and to see if the Combine Accord can become a force for good in this world and establish themselves once again, or if they're just going to encounter new enemies here that they struggle against and that could strike them down. So that's kind of the history that we're talking about right now, and we've got a couple other subjects that we're so a couple other things that tie into the lore. Certainly religion and the gods is one of the things that defines the EverQuest franchise. And we're doing a little different take on religion in this version of Norath. So what we wanted philosophically was for the gods to be tangible influences in the lives of Norathians. These are forces that they believe in, that they care about, that drive them, that are embedded in many of the political organizations in the world. What we didn't want is for these gods to just be standing around being raid targets, that you break into their plane and you attack them and you get big bags of loot, like it doesn't matter. So at the start of the game, while there's people who believe, most people believe in some form of religion, which I'll go into in a second, but nobody who's living on Norath at the time has seen any of the gods. So it's just something that they believe in. Again, very tangible forces in their lives. And there's stories about things that the gods have done in history, but nobody alive has seen one. And whether they will or not, that's to be discovered. So there's kind of, we focused on 4 separate belief systems because we kind of wanted to narrow things down and kind of tie these up into kind of bundles that fit certain cultural styles. So of these 4 main religions, there's the Seraphs, there's the Four, and then there's worship of Vishan, and something called the Norai. So I'll go into the details on this. The Seraphs are gods that, a lot of which you'll be familiar with the names of these gods. So this is the religion that's worshipped by the Combine principally. It's seen as a newer, more sophisticated kind of religion. And it focuses on 8 figures that kind of bundle up and define a lot of characteristics. They each have kind of roles in the world. And while you'll be familiar with the names, and we've deliberately worked in the nostalgia factor to tie in a lot of what you know about them already into these gods, we've also added a lot of new stuff and taken some influences from other gods and kind of combined them together. Again, it's our fresh take on this, and we wanted to have these very clear and distinct roles for each of the gods. So this, I'll show you some of the symbols here, and we're going to get to our hat giveaway as part of this. So. Pay attention. But so this symbol is kind of a combined god of Lachlan and Dranal. And this is a goddesses of prophecy and also the past. This is an example of a new deity that we've injected into the system. This is a god called Talon. This is Anashti, who's the Reaper. Be familiar from EverQuest 2. Salusak is the god of fire, but also a god of learning, a god of arcane study. Erelisi, who is not only a goddess of love in its various forms, but also a goddess of nature, of growth. Nathaniel is the champion, he's the warrior, he's a figurehead of war in its various forms, but also of honor and duty. Brel was the builder, everyone who crafts things, everyone who builds things, they revere him. And so, this is one last symbol, and can anyone guess what god this would be? I think you had your hand up first there. Karana, very good. Karana is the traveler. So he embodies the things from Norath Pass, which is the kind of storm aspect, but we've kind of modified that a little bit because storms affect traveling. So he's the god who oversees anyone who's got to make journeys, things like that. The Four is a more archaic kind of religion. It's seen as somewhat more primitive, and the civilization, the Keldarine, that preceded the doll are the ones who originated this form. Yeah. So there is Praxis, the god of water. There is Amaryl, the goddess of earth. There is Ignestus, the god of fire, and Ansha, who is the goddess of air. And again, the people of Hollis kind of worship this group. Then there's Vishen, whom, of course, the dragons worship, but there's also some mortals who worship her, but it's more of a fringe thing. And then there's the Norai, which is kind of the world spirit of Norath, which the Karen believe in, and they see this as the influence that guides their lives.
How much potential is there for player characters to be evil? I've noticed that you guys don't have Innerworld or Ralazek or any of those gods. Also, that the tier down now kind of a sect of elves that are more just elite warriors as opposed to being the evil opposite of the fear down. So how much room will there be for evil player characters to be able to be villains and fight against, say, good forces like the Combat?
So you don't know everything about the Tyrdal yet. This is just sort of the beginnings of their story. So there's more to come on that particular front. But I mean, we've discussed some stuff a little bit. We don't know exactly the extent of which there will be evil options in game and whatnot, but we definitely want to represent those types of characters in game. And exactly how that plays out, I can't really speak to yet, but we definitely want it to happen.
So, and what I would say is that we've moved away from the idea of having just like purely good gods and purely evil gods, and the worshippers of them don't have to be binary, like good or evil. There's, Anashti is the reaper, so she's seen as a goddess of death, but also of the harvest. So there's good and bad aspects to every one of these. Like Nathaniel is this big honorable dude who has valor and all that kind of thing, but he's a god of war, and war kills people. So somebody who wants to go out on the battlefield and kill millions of people would pray to Nathaniel, for that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So again, we want more shades of gray rather than just binary black and white.
All the races can smile, but not all of them are friendly.
That is deep.
Wow.
So in my experience with MMOs, there's kind of two ways that stories get told, and that's in things like EverQuest, PlanetSide, or Eve. It's really very player-based. The history's all things that players have done. And I know you're going for that with the rallying calls, the emergent content. On the other hand, you have Guild Wars 2 and the Old Republic, which very much have a static storyline. It's very NPC-focused, and it really kind of takes the spotlight from the players. One of the things that garnered a lot of respect from me in EverQuest was when the players of Rallos deck banded together and were able to kill the sleeper. That wasn't supposed to happen, but the dev just kind of rolled with it, and I thought that was really cool. To what extent, because I know you have this storyline built out beyond and you have books and stuff, to what extent are you willing to let players break away from that, alter that, and not follow your path?
So we're hoping to do a little bit of both. Like, we will have a path that people can follow if they feel like it, but we're going to have a whole lot of stuff that is off the grid, so to speak, that you just need to go find. And it's just going to be out there, and you can do whatever you want. We talked a lot about that with the emergent AI, where a lot of those characters are going to react in different ways that you're going to make happen that we don't even necessarily design for. It's just like we put things in the world, and then we watch what happens. And hopefully it doesn't break most of the time. But yeah, that's the idea, is that players can go in and do crazy stuff and have their own specific stories, and they'll be alongside the heroes that are there when they want to play with those heroes.
There's a whole bunch of stuff we haven't even talked about yet in regards to that.
Lots more to announce as time passes.
I heard the term transmedia thrown around, and I was wondering if you guys were planning on doing anything more other than with publishing, maybe like YouTube machinima, movies.
Lunchboxes?
That would be awesome. I just want to be an extra in the movie if it ever happens.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, we would love to do
the
that
answer is
stuff.
we want to make sure that the IP is full-bodied enough that it can support whatever avenues that we can pursue. But so we're not ruling anything out at this point in time.
Which is not to say that we're selling out the quality of the lore, or that we're hell-bent for leather to get a Sci-Fi Channel ongoing series. The fact of the matter is we are all about the quality of books.
But if J.J. Abrams comes knocking at our door and wants a script for EverQuest Next movie,
He's going to have to convince us that it'll be good.
that's right.
When meeting the gods, will you be able to have lengthy conversations about their views?
Sorry?
Will you be able to have conversations with the gods about what they have and what they think about the world and their views on it?
With the gods specifically, like we said, there really aren't the gods. No one's seen or talked to a god at this point in the history. Like, it's been so long since anyone's actually had any real contact, so to speak, with them, that probably not for quite a while.
But there are organizations in the world associated with each of these gods. So there's a Church of the Seraphs, for example, that has a high priest in it, and it has priests to each of the individual gods that make up the Seraphs. So certainly those priests believe that they have the ear of the gods, and some of them would say, I had a dream that Nathaniel came to me and told me this. And there's things like that. So are they telling the truth? Are they lying? That's something for you to discover in the game.
Will we be forced to follow a certain god, or can we choose to be agnostic? And you can't deny the gods, but can you choose not to follow them?
Yeah, that's not even a
Yeah.
choice you have.
It's not even it's not part of character create or anything. Like, there might be, like we talked about, some of the classes might have specific restrictions
Right.
or something that might be involved in that, but you're never going to be locked into a specific god. You're not going to have the faction issues you had in other games because you picked the wrong
It's
deity.
not an arbitrary choice you have to make without any knowledge.
It's not part of the mechanism of advancing your character.
And in a world where no one has seen any of the gods, being agnostic and not believing them is certainly a valid choice.
My question kind of goes along with his. Is that when I rolled up my character in the very first EverQuest, you had this lore about the different gods and their philosophy on life, and I made a choice based on a philosophy I agreed with. Is there an opportunity in the game to explore that philosophy with those priests that you were talking about, and somehow do quests that enhance your character in some way?
So to answer your question, yes, but not just as it relates to the gods. So the ability to create a character and pursue a philosophy, courage, truthfulness, justice, so on and so forth, that exists for players in the game, regardless of what god they may be interested in, or what god espouses a particular subset of those beliefs.
Yeah, or profiteering or deception or any of the things that would be negative. Yeah, you choose what you want to do. If that associates with a god, then it does.
And the thing is that the NPC, the factions in the world, will see how you've played and react to that. So if you've been out on the roads and instead of helping people, you've been helping rob them, things like that, then the goddess Talon, who is the goddess of rogues and brigands and things like that, her followers will see you and go, hey, your beliefs kind of align with ours. Here's some things that we could do together. Here are some adventures that you could go on that would benefit our organization and help get you rich too. So again, that's part of having that world be very dynamic and not waiting for you to walk up to a guy with an exclamation point over his head, but just by doing the things that you want to do in the world and playing the way that your character feels like it should believe and behave, the world reacts to that and opens up new opportunities for you based on that.
So in other words, that is a mechanism of advancement.
Yeah.
Okay.